I never believed in fate until the day I signed a lease that changed everything. The fluorescent lights in the school's administrative office hummed overhead as I stared at the housing contract, my fingers trembling slightly from exhaustion. 3 interviews, 2 rejected applications, and a bank account that screamed desperation had led me here to a too-good-to-be-true apartment listing pinned to the teacher's lounge bulletin board. The realtor, a nervous woman with darting eyes, slid the papers across the desk without meeting my gaze. "It's a unique opportunity," she said, her voice oddly flat. "The landlord prefers quiet tenants. Teachers are ideal." I should have asked more questions. I should have wondered why a fully renovated apartment 3 blocks from the prestigious academy where I'd just been hired cost less than a college dorm room. But desperation has a way of silencing intuition. My pen scratched across the signature line, sealing whatever bargain I'd just made. The realtor's shoulders sagged with relief, as if she'd just passed off something she no longer wanted to carry. "Welcome to the property," she murmured, gathering the papers with unusual speed. "The landlord will introduce himself soon." That night, I stood in my new apartment, surrounded by boxes I was too tired to unpack. The space was beautiful in an unsettling way, too clean, too perfect, as if staged rather than lived in. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked a private garden that separated my building from an imposing mansion next door, all dark stone and wrought iron gates. I told myself I was lucky. I told myself this was the fresh start I needed. Then I heard it. A sharp crack split the silence, not quite thunder, not quite fireworks. My body recognized the sound before my mind did. Gunfire, distant but unmistakable. I moved to the window, my reflection ghostly in the glass, and searched the darkness. The mansion's security lights blazed to life, illuminating nothing but manicured hedges and shadows. I pressed my forehead against the cool window, convincing myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion had turned a car backfiring into something sinister. That's when I noticed the camera, a small security device mounted on the mansion's wall, its red light blinking steadily, and it was pointed directly at my window. At me. I stepped back quickly, my heart hammering, and pulled the curtains closed with shaking hands. Sleep didn't come easily that night. Every sound became a threat: branches scraping glass, pipes settling, my own breathing too loud in the dark. I'd signed the lease. I'd already given up my previous sublet. There was no going back now. Morning arrived with an unexpected knock. I opened the door, still wrapped in my bathrobe, expecting a neighbor or perhaps the building manager. Instead, I found him, tall, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly salary, with dark eyes that seemed to catalog everything about me in a single glance. His presence filled the doorway, commanding without effort. "Miss Reyes," he said, his voice smooth as expensive whiskey. "I'm Lorenzo DeLuca, your landlord." The name meant nothing to me then, though it should have. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, moving through my space with the ease of someone who owned not just the building, but everything in it, including, perhaps, me. "I wanted to ensure you're settling in comfortably," he continued, his gaze sweeping the room before landing back on me, "and to go over a few house rules." There was something magnetic about him, something that made my pulse quicken in a way that felt both dangerous and inevitable. His questions felt too personal for a landlord. What hours did I work? Did I have family nearby? Did I often have visitors? Each inquiry wrapped in courtesy but weighted with something else. Control, maybe, or calculation. When I asked about the maintenance schedule, trying to steer the conversation to normal territory, he simply smiled. "I take care of my properties personally," he said, "and my tenants." As he turned to leave, I caught sight of his wrist. A tattoo peeked out from beneath his cuff, geometric lines and symbols that looked almost military, though I couldn't quite make out the full design. My throat tightened. A man in a black suit waited in the hallway, and when Lorenzo emerged, the bodyguard nodded once, a gesture of deference that spoke volumes. This wasn't a normal landlord checking on maintenance. This was something else entirely. "Welcome home," Lorenzo said softly, and the way he said it made me feel both protected and trapped. The next few days passed in uneasy routine. I threw myself into preparing lesson plans, decorating my classroom, learning the names of students whose families could afford the academy's steep tuition. But I couldn't shake the awareness that I was being watched. not paranoia fact. The cameras were everywhere once I started looking, and at night, from my window, I sometimes saw figures moving through the mansion's grounds, their silhouettes sharp against security lights. It was on my 4th evening that I made my first mistake. The apartment had a small terrace that overlooked the shared garden, and I'd been dying to explore it properly. The sun was setting, painting everything gold and rose, and I convinced myself that stepping onto the grass to look at the flower beds wasn't trespassing. I was wrong. I'd barely knelt beside a bed of night-blooming jasmine when heavy footsteps approached. 2 men in dark clothing appeared from nowhere, their expressions hard. "This area is restricted," one said, his hand moving toward something at his waist. My mouth went dry. I started to apologize, to back away, when Lorenzo's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Gentlemen." A single word, but they froze. He materialized from the evening shadows, his presence shifting the entire dynamic. The guards stepped back immediately, their aggression evaporating. Lorenzo moved between us, his body angled in a way that shielded me without seeming to. "She's my tenant," he said quietly, "under my protection." The men nodded and disappeared as quickly as they'd come. Lorenzo turned to me, and I saw something flicker in his eyes, concern, maybe, or irritation that I'd put myself at risk. "Certain areas of the property are off limits," he explained, his tone gentle but firm. "The garden on this side is fine. Beyond that gate you don't go. Ever. Do you understand?" I nodded, my voice stuck somewhere in my chest. He reached out as if to steady me, then seemed to think better of it. "I know it seems excessive," he continued, "but I need you to trust me. Your safety depends on following these rules." The word safety hung between us, loaded with implications I wasn't ready to examine. As I turned to go back inside, his hand caught my arm light, barely a touch. "You shouldn't have seen that," he murmured, and I glimpsed his other hand adjusting his cuff, hiding what looked like a bloodstain on white fabric. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the casual authority he wielded, the way trained men obeyed him without question, about the blood, about the word protection, and what it really meant. The envelope appeared under my door 3 days later. Heavy cream paper, my name written in elegant script. Inside, a single card, an invitation to dinner at the mansion. No explanation, no option to decline, just a time and the words, "I'd like to continue our conversation." My hands shook as I held it. Every instinct screamed that I should refuse, make an excuse, maintain distance. But curiosity had already taken root, winding through my fear like ivy through ruins. I told myself I was going to be polite, professional, that I'd eat quickly and leave. The mansion's interior stole my breath. Where I'd expected dark, oppressive luxury, I found warmth, art on every wall, books lining shelves that reached the ceiling, and a grand piano in the corner that looked both loved and lonely. Lorenzo waited in a dining room lit by candles, the table set for 2 with a simplicity that somehow felt more intimate than opulence. "Thank you for coming," he said, pulling out my chair. I realized we got off to a strange start. I wanted to remedy that. Dinner was surreal. He spoke about literature. He'd read everything from Dante to Garcia Marquez, and asked about my teaching philosophy with genuine interest. When he smiled, really smiled, it transformed his face into something almost boyish. I found myself relaxing despite everything, laughing at a dry observation he made about modern education. For those 2 hours, he wasn't the intimidating figure from my doorway. He was just a man. Lonely, maybe, burdened by things he couldn't say. "I don't often have company," he admitted over dessert, his fingers tracing the rim of his wineglass. "My work doesn't allow for much of a personal life. But you," he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, "you remind me that there's still normalcy in the world." Goodness. The compliment settled over me like a warm coat, dangerous in its comfort. As he walked me to the door, I noticed the piano again, a piece of sheet music resting on the stand. The title, handwritten at the top, "For Father." Something about it felt unbearably sad. Lorenzo followed my gaze. "I should play for you sometime," he said softly. Then, before I could respond, he added, "Sleep well. You're safe here." But as I left, passing through his study, I saw it just a glimpse before he smoothly redirected me. My photograph among papers on his desk, not a casual snapshot but my staff photo from the academy, printed and filed with what looked like background information. My blood ran cold. He'd known about me before I ever signed that lease. This hadn't been random at all. The question that kept me awake that night wasn't why he'd orchestrated my tenancy. It was why I wasn't running. School became my refuge, the one place where everything made sense. My students were bright, eager, unaware of the strange double life I was stumbling into, but even that sanctuary began to crack. It started with whispers in the teacher's lounge, fragments of conversation that stopped when I entered. A colleague, Mrs. Chen, finally pulled me aside during lunch. "I don't know if anyone's told you," she said, her voice low, "but your landlord, the DeLuca family, they're not just wealthy. They control half the coastal operations. Shipping, imports." She didn't finish, but her meaning was clear. I laughed it off, or tried to. Urban legends, I told myself. Rich families always attracted rumors, but Mrs. Chen's expression remained serious. "Just be careful," she urged. "Keep your distance. People who get close to that family tend to disappear into their world, and not everyone comes back out." Her warning echoed in my head all day. During my last class, as I wrote vocabulary words on the board, I noticed something through the window. A dark sedan parked across the street, the same one I'd seen that morning near my apartment. When I left the building after grading papers, it was still there, following me. My heart raced as I walked to my car, trying to seem casual, normal. That's when I saw it, a small device attached underneath, blinking faintly in the dimming light. A tracker. Someone was monitoring my every movement, and I had a sinking feeling I knew who. My hands trembled as I stood there in the parking lot, torn between fury and fear. Was Lorenzo protecting me, or controlling me? And what was I being protected from? That night, I decided to confront him, but I never got the chance. I'd stopped at a convenience store 3 blocks from the apartment, needing milk and the illusion of normalcy. The streetlights in that neighborhood were spotty, leaving pockets of shadow between pools of yellow light. I was halfway back to my car when I felt it, that primal awareness that you're not alone. 2 men stepped out from beside a dumpster, their faces obscured by hoods. "Miss Reyes," one said, and hearing my name in his mouth made my stomach drop. "Someone wants to send a message to your landlord." I ran. Stupid, maybe, but instinct overrode thought. Their footsteps pounded behind me, closer, closer, and then stopped. A car screeched to a halt, its door slamming. I spun around to see Lorenzo moving toward my attackers with a fluidity that was beautiful and terrifying. His movements were clinical, efficient, each strike calculated. Within seconds, both men were on the ground, and he hadn't broken a sweat, but it was what happened next that undid me. He didn't pursue them as they scrambled away. Instead, he turned to me, his expression shifting from cold focus to something achingly tender. His hands found my shoulders, his thumbs brushing my neck as he checked for injuries. "Are you hurt?" His voice was rough, with barely controlled emotion. "Did they touch you?" I couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at this man who'd just taken down 2 attackers like it was routine. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder. Lorenzo glanced toward the sound, then back at me. "I have to go," he said urgently. "The police can't find me here. Will you be all right?" When I nodded, still in shock, he shrugged off his coat and draped it around my shoulders. The fabric smelled like cedar and something darker, something that probably cost more than my car. Then he was gone, dissolving into the shadows as if he'd never been there. The police took my statement. I told them everything, except the most important part, that Lorenzo had saved me, that he'd known exactly how to fight, that he'd vanished to avoid them. When I finally made it home, I sat on my couch still wearing his coat and let myself acknowledge the truth I'd been avoiding. Whatever Lorenzo was involved in, it was dangerous, violent, real, and I was already in too deep to walk away. The next day, I went looking for answers. The mansion had a library. I'd seen it briefly during my dinner visit. When Lorenzo sent a text asking me to stop by to retrieve something I'd left behind, I hadn't, but I understood the subtext. I took the opportunity to explore. The library was 2 stories of floor-to-ceiling shelves, the kind of room that smelled like old paper and secrets. I found what I was looking for in a locked cabinet that wasn't quite locked, tucked behind leather-bound first editions. Newspapers, dozens of them, spanning years, and they all featured the same name, DeLuca. My hands shook as I spread them across the mahogany desk. DeLuca heir questioned in shipping investigation. Alleged syndicate leader cleared of charges. Lorenzo De Luca inherits family empire after father's suspicious death. The words blurred together, painting a picture I'd been desperately trying to ignore. This wasn't rumor or gossip. This was documented history. Lorenzo wasn't just connected to organized crime, he was its heir, its future, possibly its current leader. I wondered when you'd go looking. His voice made me jump, scattering papers. Lorenzo stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable. He looked exhausted, older somehow, as if the weight of his secrets had physically manifested overnight. He moved into the room slowly, carefully, like he was approaching something wounded and unpredictable. "I should have told you," he said quietly. "But the truth is, I hoped you'd never need to know." I found my voice, though it came out shakier than I wanted. "Who are you? Really?" He sank into the chair across from me, and for a long moment, he just looked at me, really looked, as if memorizing my face. "My father built an empire on fear and loyalty," he finally said. "When he died, it became mine. I've been trying to legitimize it, to transform what he created into something legal, but..." He gestured at the newspapers. "Some stains don't wash out. Some debts can't be paid with clean money." The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. I'd expected denials, threats maybe, certainly not this raw admission. "The men who attacked me," I pressed. "They wanted to send you a message." "What did they mean?" "There are people who don't want me to succeed in changing things," Lorenzo explained, "who profit from the old ways. They see my reforms as weakness, and they've figured out the fastest way to hurt me is through..." He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Through people I care about." The implication hung between us, heavy and impossible. "You barely know me," I whispered. "I know enough." His eyes met mine, dark and fierce. "I know you see 30 students, and manage to remember not just their names but their struggles. I know you chose teaching over higher-paying careers because you actually believe education changes lives. I know." His voice dropped. "I know that having you near is the closest I've felt to human in 5 years." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was the moment, the pivot point where I could still walk away, report everything to the police, return to my ordinary life. But even as I thought it, I knew the truth. Ordinary had already disappeared the moment I signed that lease. Maybe even before that, maybe from the first moment he'd decided I was worth protecting. "Knowing means you can't leave," Lorenzo said, echoing my thoughts. "Once you understand what I am, you become part of it. The people who want to hurt me won't care that you're innocent. They'll use you anyway. So you have a choice, but it has to be now. Walk away, and I'll arrange for you to relocate, somewhere safe, far from here. Or stay, and accept that your life will never be simple again." I should have chosen safety. Every rational cell in my body screamed at me to take his offer, to run as far and fast as possible. But I thought about the way he'd checked my pulse before his attackers, the loneliness in his eyes when he'd played that piano piece for his father, the careful way he draped his coat around my shoulders, as if I was something precious he couldn't quite believe he was allowed to touch. "I'm staying," I heard myself say. Relief and regret washed over his face in equal measure. He nodded once, accepting my decision, sealing whatever fate we'd just chosen together. "Then we do this my way," he said firmly. "You follow my rules. You accept protection. You trust me to keep you safe, even when you don't understand why I'm doing what I'm doing." "Okay," I agreed, my voice steadier now. "But I have conditions too. No more secrets. No more surveillance without telling me. And if you're going to claim you care about me..." The words caught in my throat. Too bold, too revealing, but I pushed through. "Then treat me like a partner, not a possession." Something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or admiration. "Deal," he said softly. Then he stood, extending his hand to help me up. When our fingers touched, electricity sparked between us, impossible to ignore. For a heartbeat, I thought he might kiss me. Instead, he stepped back, putting careful distance between us. "This changes everything," he murmured, almost to himself. He had no idea how right he was. The next morning, I woke to find a man in a dark suit outside my apartment. Lorenzo's introduction was brief and matter-of-fact. "This is Marcus. He'll be your shadow for a while." Discreet but present. Marcus nodded politely, his eyes scanning the street even as we spoke. Having a bodyguard felt absurd, like I'd stumbled into someone else's life. But Lorenzo was immovable on this point. Non-negotiable, he said when I protested. You're a target now. I won't apologize for keeping you alive. Adjusting to this new reality was surreal. Marcus drove me to school each morning, waited in the parking lot during classes, and escorted me home through routes that changed daily. At first, my colleagues noticed and whispered, but when I offered no explanation, the gossip eventually faded into background noise. What didn't fade was the growing connection between Lorenzo and me. He started appearing at unexpected moments, joining me for coffee on my terrace in the morning, his tie loosened and his guard slightly down, asking about my day with genuine interest, listening as I vented about administrative headaches and difficult parents. Once, I found him in my apartment when I got home. He had a key, of course, fixing a leaky faucet I'd mentioned in passing. The domesticity of it was jarring and wonderful and terrifying all at once. You don't have to do this, I told him, watching as he tightened a pipe fitting. I know, he replied, not looking up. But when was the last time someone took care of you? The question lodged itself in my chest, uncomfortable in its accuracy. I'd been self-sufficient for so long, pride and necessity merging until I'd forgotten what it felt like to be looked after, to matter to someone. Lorenzo finished with the faucet, wiping his hands on a towel I'd offered. When he turned to face me, something in the air shifted, a magnetic pull neither of us was quite ready to acknowledge. I should go, he said, but he didn't move. You should, I agreed, equally frozen. The moment stretched, taut and fragile, until his phone shattered it. The ringtone was different, sharp, urgent, and his expression transformed instantly. He answered in rapid Italian, his voice hard with authority. I caught fragments, names I didn't recognize, locations, something about a breach. When he hung up, all the warmth had drained from his face. I have to handle something, he said, already moving toward the door. Marcus will stay with you. Don't leave the apartment tonight, please. Lorenzo, I started, but he paused, his hand on the doorframe. They know about you, he said, quietly, and the fear in his voice was more terrifying than any threat. They've been watching. We need to be more careful. Then he was gone, and I was left alone with Marcus standing guard outside, and the terrible knowledge that I'd become a weapon aimed at the man I was falling for. The danger found its way to my classroom 2 days later. One of my students, Jamie, a quiet 12-year-old with a gift for mathematics, didn't show up for homeroom. In itself, not unusual, kids got sick. Families had emergencies. But when his mother called the school frantically an hour later saying he'd never made it home the previous afternoon, my blood turned to ice. The administrators immediately contacted the police, launching protocols I'd only read about in training manuals. And I immediately thought of Lorenzo, of enemies who used innocence as leverage. I called him from the hallway, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. He answered on the first ring. What's wrong? A student is missing, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Jamie Chen. He disappeared yesterday after school, and his mother just, Chen? Lorenzo interrupted, his tone sharpening. Related to Victoria Chen? My colleague, the one who'd warned me about the DeLuca family. Her nephew, I confirmed. Silence on the line, heavy with implication. Then, this isn't random. I'll handle it. Stay at the school, stay visible. I'll call you back within an hour. He hung up before I could respond, leaving me in the fluorescent-lit hallway with a gnawing certainty that Jamie's disappearance was connected to me, to Lorenzo, to the dangerous world I'd chosen to enter. The hour felt like days. I went through the motions of teaching my afternoon classes while police officers interviewed staff and searched the grounds. When my phone finally buzzed, I nearly dropped it in my haste to answer. He's alive, Lorenzo said without preamble, scared but unharmed. I'm sending men to retrieve him now. The people responsible won't bother your school again. Relief flooded through me so intensely I had to sit down. How did you... Don't ask questions you don't want answered, he said gently. Just know that he'll be home by dinner. But we need to talk. Tonight. Meet me at the address I'm texting you. The address wasn't his mansion. It was somewhere outside the city, coordinates rather than a street name. I should have been frightened, should have insisted on meeting somewhere public and safe. But fear had been replaced by something more complex, a desperate need to understand the full scope of what I'd stepped into, and a growing certainty that Lorenzo's world, for all its darkness, operated by its own code of honor. Marcus drove me as evening fell, the city lights giving way to rural darkness. We pulled up to a villa I hadn't known existed, modern and minimalist, all glass and steel, perched on a cliff overlooking the ocean. Lorenzo waited at the door, and the moment I saw his face, I knew something had shifted. He looked haunted, older, as if the afternoon's events had cost him something irreplaceable. "Come in," he said quietly. "We have a lot to discuss." The villa's interior was sparse, impersonal, a safe house, I realized, not a home. Lorenzo poured 2 glasses of whiskey with hands that shook almost imperceptibly. "The people who took Jamie were sending a message," he began without sitting down. "They wanted me to know they could reach anyone I care about. Students at your school, your colleagues, you." He finally met my eyes. "This is what I meant when I said knowing me would change your life. This is the reality." "But you got him back," I said, clinging to that fact. "This time." His voice was heavy with exhaustion. "But there will be other times, other threats." "And I can't," he broke off, rubbing his face. For the first time since I'd met him, Lorenzo looked uncertain, vulnerable. "Maybe I was wrong to let you stay. Maybe you should. Accept my original offer. Disappear somewhere safe." I stood, crossing the space between us. "Is that what you want?" "What I want." He laughed bitterly. "I want you to have the normal life you deserve. I want to wake up next to you without worrying that my enemies will use you to destroy me. I want." His voice cracked. "I want things I have no right to want." My heart hammered as I reached for his hand. His fingers closed around mine, holding on like I was an anchor in rough seas. "I'm not going anywhere," I said firmly. "We deal with this together. You teach me how to navigate your world, and I'll remind you what it's like to be human. That's the deal." He pulled me closer, his forehead resting against mine. "You have no idea what you're signing up for." "Then show me," I whispered. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable and earth-shattering. His hands framed my face with a gentleness that contradicted everything I knew about what those hands could do. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, the world had rearranged itself. There was no going back now. We'd crossed a line that redefined everything. "Stay here tonight," Lorenzo murmured against my hair. "It's safer. And He paused, seeming to struggle with the admission. "I need you close. Just for tonight." I stayed. We didn't sleep together, not in the way my body ached for, but we lay on the couch as he explained things, the structure of his organization, the families he was negotiating with, the legitimate businesses he was building to replace the old revenue streams. He spoke about his father with a complexity of grief and resentment, about expectations and legacies that felt like chains. And I listened, my head on his chest, his heartbeat steady beneath my ear. In the dark hours before dawn, he played something on the villa's piano, a new melody, tender and achingly hopeful. "What is it?" I asked sleepily. He hesitated, then said so quietly I almost missed it. "I haven't named it, yet, but I suspected I knew." And the knowledge wrapped around my heart like a promise and a warning. The fragile peace lasted 3 weeks. 3 weeks of growing closer, of stolen moments between the danger. Lorenzo was careful, almost obsessively so, ensuring I was never exposed to the darker aspects of his work. But I saw changes: fewer late-night calls, more time spent in legitimate meetings, his entire demeanor shifting toward something lighter. He was trying to build an exit, I realized, trying to construct a life where we could exist without constantly looking over our shoulders. I was grading papers on a Saturday afternoon when Marcus knocked urgently. "Miss Reyes, we need to move you. Now." "What? Why?" "Mr. DeLuca's orders. There's been a development." Within minutes, I was in a car heading back to the villa, my mind racing through possibilities. When we arrived, I found Lorenzo pacing the living room, his phone pressed to his ear, conducting a conversation in Italian that sounded like barely controlled fury. He saw me and immediately ended the call. "What's happening?" I demanded. He crossed to me, his hands gripping my arms. "There's someone here to see me, someone from my past. I didn't know she was coming, and I need you to understand." The front door opened before he could finish. A woman entered, stunning and composed in a way that made my teacher's casual clothes feel shabby. She took in the scene, Lorenzo's hands on me, our obvious intimacy, and her expression tightened. "Lorenzo," she said coolly, "I see you've been busy." He stepped away from me, and the sudden distance felt like a chasm. Gianna, I didn't expect you until next month. Obviously. Her gaze flicked to me, assessing and dismissing in one look. But the families decided to move up the timeline. The engagement party is scheduled for next week. My parents are already making arrangements. The word engagement hit me like a physical blow. I looked at Lorenzo, waiting for him to contradict her, to explain. But his face had gone carefully blank, the mask he wore when dealing with business. We should discuss this privately, he said to Gianna. Why? She moved further into the room, claiming space with elegant confidence. Does your tenant not know? How awkward. She turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. I'm Gianna Moretti, Lorenzo's fiancée. We've been promised to each other since we were children. A strategic alliance between our families. The floor tilted beneath me. Lorenzo? My voice came out smaller than I intended. It's complicated, he said, but the words were ashes. It's really not, Gianna countered. We have an arrangement, one that ensures peace between our territories and secures both our positions. Surely you understand how these things work, Lorenzo. Or have you forgotten in your attempt to play house with? Her gesture toward me was eloquently dismissive. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think past the roaring in my ears. Everything he'd said, everything we'd shared, had it all been a lie? A temporary distraction before he returned to his real life? You said no more secrets, I managed, looking at Lorenzo. This isn't... He reached for me, but I stepped back. The engagement is political. It doesn't mean what? Anger was replacing hurt, hot and clarifying. That you weren't planning to marry her? That you were going to somehow tell me about your arranged marriage before I found out like this? I was trying to find a way out of it, he said desperately. I've been negotiating. For 3 weeks? I laughed, the sound brittle. We've been together 3 weeks, Lorenzo. Forgive me if I'm not confident about your negotiation timeline. I grabbed my jacket from where I'd dropped it, needing to move, to escape before I completely fell apart. Marcus can take me back to the apartment. You can't go back there. It's not safe. Then I'll stay with a day, friend, or a hotel, anywhere but here. I moved toward the door, and Lorenzo followed. Please, just give me a chance to explain properly. Gianna's arrival was unexpected, but I swear to you, I was going to tell you about the arrangement, when. I spun to face him. Before or after you married her? The question hung unanswered as I walked out into the night. A storm was rolling in, dark clouds obscuring the stars, wind whipping my hair. I heard Lorenzo calling my name, but I kept walking, down the long driveway, not caring where I was going, just needing distance. Headlights appeared behind me, Marcus following in the car. I got in, ignoring his concerned glance, and gave him the address of the only place I could think of. The apartment suddenly felt like a cage. But it was my cage, and right now, that was all I had. I spent the next 2 days ignoring Lorenzo's calls, his texts, the notes he sent via Marcus. I went to work, taught my classes with a brightness that felt like shattering glass, and came home to an empty apartment that echoed with everything I'd almost let myself believe. Mrs. Chen found me crying in the staff bathroom on the 3rd day. I warned you, she said gently, but without judgment. That world doesn't play by normal rules. I know, I managed. I just thought, what had I thought? That I was special? That love could somehow transcend the brutal pragmatism of organized crime families? That a man like Lorenzo could simply walk away from generations of obligation because a school teacher made him feel human? Do you love him? Mrs. Chen asked. The question caught me off guard. Did I? Could you love someone in 3 weeks? Could you love someone whose life was built on violence and whose future was already promised to someone else? It doesn't matter, I said finally. It's the only thing that matters, she countered. Then more carefully, my husband worked for the DeLuca family years ago, before Lorenzo took over. It was different then. Harsher. When Lorenzo's father died and he assumed control, things changed. Slowly, but noticeably. He's trying to transform something that doesn't want to be transformed. She handed me a tissue. I'm not saying you should forgive him, but I am saying that man is fighting a war on multiple fronts, and from what I've seen, you're the only thing he's ever fought for that wasn't about duty or survival. Her words stayed with me through the afternoon, through my last class, through the drive home where Marcus maintained his usual professional silence. I was still turning them over when I pulled into my building's parking lot and saw the dark sedan. Wrong model, wrong plates, not one of Lorenzo's. My heart seized, I didn't have time to react. The sedan's doors opened, men emerging with weapons I recognized from news reports but had never seen in person. Marcus was shouting into his phone, positioning himself between me and the threat, his hand on his own weapon. "Get down!" The world exploded into noise and chaos. Gunfire shattered glass, the sharp cracks mixing with my screaming. Marcus returned fire, pushing me behind the car, his body a shield. More headlights, more shouting, and then Lorenzo's voice cutting through everything. "Fall back," I said, "fall back." I don't remember the exact sequence of what happened next. Only fragments: Lorenzo running toward me in a way that defied every tactical instinct, his expression raw with fear. The gunman swinging to aim at him. My scream that came too late. The way Lorenzo's body jerked, the bloom of red spreading across his white shirt as he collapsed. Then I was on the ground beside him, my hands pressing against the wound, blood hot and slick between my fingers. His eyes found mine, unfocused but aware. "Should've stayed at the villa," he whispered, trying to smile. "Don't you dare," I choked out. "Don't you dare die on me, Lorenzo De Luca." "Wasn't planning to," he murmured, his hand covering mine, where it pressed against his ribs. "Still have to. Explain." Sirens wailed closer. Marcus was on his phone, coordinating something, his own shoulder bleeding but functional. More of Lorenzo's men arrived, forming a perimeter, but the attackers had already fled. I stayed on the ground, holding Lorenzo, my tears mixing with rain that had started to fall. "Help is coming," I kept saying like a prayer. "Just hold on. Please just hold on." His eyes closed, and for a terrible moment, I thought I'd lost him. But then his pulse fluttered beneath my fingers, weak but present. The ambulance arrived in a blur of lights and urgent voices. They tried to separate us, but I refused to let go until they physically pulled me away. Marcus caught me as my knees buckled. "He's strong," he said quietly. "He'll survive this." But as I watched them load Lorenzo into the ambulance, blood soaking through bandages, I wasn't sure survival was enough. Because even if his body healed, I didn't know how we'd survive everything else. The engagement, the violence, the fundamental impossibility of our worlds ever truly aligning. The hospital became my prison for the next 18 hours. They wouldn't let me see him family only, and I wasn't family, no matter what my heart screamed. I sat in the waiting room with Marcus, who'd refused treatment for his own injury until he knew Lorenzo was stable, and watched the minutes crawl past. Eventually, a doctor emerged. "Mr. De Luca is out of surgery. The bullet missed major organs, but he lost a lot of blood. He's stable. But what? But what?" I demanded. The doctor hesitated. "The police want to question him about the shooting, and there are complications regarding his legal status in all of this. I'd recommend he speak with a lawyer before making any statements." Reality crashed down. Lorenzo wasn't just a shooting victim. He was a suspect, a person of interest in ongoing investigations. If he stayed in the hospital, he'd be arrested. If he left, he'd be a fugitive. There was no safe path forward. Marcus seemed to understand faster than I did. "We need to move him," he said quietly, "as soon as he can travel." "Move him where?" I asked. Marcus looked at me steadily. "Anywhere the police aren't looking, which means he'll need someone to hide him, someone they wouldn't suspect." The implication was clear and insane, and the only option we had. "My apartment," I heard myself say. "They already searched it after the shooting. They won't come back." "Miss Reyes, if you do this, you become an accessory. I don't care." And I didn't. Somewhere between watching him fall and sitting in this sterile waiting room, I'd made my choice. Whatever happened, we'd face it together. Tell me what needs to happen. The extraction happened at 3 a.m. when the hospital was at its quietest. Marcus had arranged everything with an efficiency that spoke of prior experience. We moved Lorenzo through service corridors, past security cameras that mysteriously malfunctioned, into a waiting car. He was barely conscious, drugged for the pain, his face pale in the dim light. "Where?" he mumbled as we settled him in the back seat. "Somewhere safe," I promised, holding his hand. My apartment had never felt smaller. We got Lorenzo onto my bed, Marcus helping me prop him up with pillows to ease his breathing. The wound dressing would need changing every few hours, medications administered on schedule, infection monitored carefully. "I've texted you instructions," Marcus said, preparing to leave, "and I'll check in daily. But from this point forward, officially, I don't know where he is." Understood. I walked him to the door. Marcus? Thank you. He nodded once, his expression unreadable. He's a good man trying to do right in an impossible situation. Whatever else he's done, remember that. Then he was gone, and I was alone with an unconscious Mafia heir bleeding in my bed and half the city's law enforcement probably looking for him. I should have been terrified. Instead, I felt strangely calm. Purpose, maybe, or simply the clarity that comes from making an irrevocable choice. I checked Lorenzo's vitals like the instruction sheet described, changed his bandages with shaking hands, and settled into the chair beside the bed to watch him breathe. He woke at dawn, his eyes finding me immediately. "You're a terrible influence," he rasped, says the man bleeding in my bed. A ghost of a smile. Fair point. He tried to sit up and immediately gasped, pain stealing his breath. "Don't move," I ordered, adjusting his pillows. "You're supposed to rest." "Can't rest. Police will be looking. You shouldn't have." He caught my hand, his grip surprisingly strong despite everything. "Why did you bring me here? After Gianna, after everything, you should have let them take me." "Probably," I agreed. "But I'm apparently terrible at self-preservation." I met his eyes. "You were going to explain, about the engagement, so explain." He took a careful breath, each word clearly costing him. "Gianna's family controls the eastern ports. When my father died, there was a power vacuum. Civil war, essentially, over who would lead. The engagement was negotiated as a peace treaty, my legitimacy as heir in exchange for uniting our territories through marriage." His thumb traced circles on my palm. "I've been trying to find another way, offering territory, money, anything that would let me break the contract without breaking the peace, but it takes time, and I didn't want you to know until I had a solution. Because you thought I'd leave. Because I knew you'd see it for what it is, proof that I can never fully escape this life, that I'll always be making impossible choices between duty and what I actually want." His voice dropped. "And what I want is you, completely, permanently, in a way that terrifies me. But wanting isn't enough in my world." I should have been angry at the presumption, at his assumption that he could control the narrative. But mostly, I was just tired. Tired of fighting the pull between us. Tired of pretending this could end any way but heartbreak or triumph with nothing in between. "So, what do we do?" I asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I know I'm done pretending I can do this alone. Done pretending you're not the only real thing in my life." His eyes searched mine. "If you'll have me, broken promises, impossible situation, police probably knocking on your door any moment, I'm yours. Completely." The declaration should have felt romantic. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, knowing the jump would either destroy me or teach me to fly. "Okay," I whispered. "But we do this differently. No more secrets. No more protection through ignorance. If I'm in this, I'm all the way in. Your world, your choices, your consequences. I want to understand all of it. It could get you killed. You almost got killed saving me. I think we're past safety being the priority." I leaned forward, careful of his injury, and kissed him softly. "We figure this out together, or we don't figure it out at all." He pulled me closer, ignoring the pain it must have caused, and kissed me like I was air and he'd been drowning. When we finally broke apart, his forehead rested against mine. "When this is over," he murmured. "When I've found a way out of the engagement and neutralized the threats and built something legitimate. When this is over," I interrupted. "We'll deal with what comes next. But right now, you need to heal, and I need to figure out what to tell the police when they inevitably come asking questions." They came that afternoon. 2 detectives, polite but persistent, wanting to know if I'd seen Lorenzo, if I had any information about his whereabouts. I lied with a steadiness that surprised me, explaining that we'd had a falling out, that I hadn't heard from him since before the shooting. They didn't entirely believe. Me, I could see it in their skeptical expressions, but they had no evidence to push further. After they left, I leaned against the closed door, my heart hammering. "You're a terrible liar," Lorenzo called from the bedroom, amusement in his voice despite the situation. "I've never had to lie to police before," I shot back, returning to check his bandages. "Unlike some people." The next few days fell into a strange domesticity. I went to work, maintained normalcy, while Lorenzo healed in my apartment. Marcus delivered supplies and updates. The rival family who'd ordered the attack was fracturing under internal pressure, buying us time. The engagement party had been postponed given the circumstances. The police investigation was focusing on gang activity rather than Lorenzo specifically. In the evenings, I'd come home to find Lorenzo a bit stronger, a bit more present. We talked about everything: my childhood, his father's brutal expectations, the business deals he was negotiating to replace criminal revenue with legitimate operations. He showed me spreadsheets on his laptop, explaining how he was trying to build an empire that didn't require violence to sustain. "It'll take years," he admitted. "Maybe a decade, but I think it's possible, especially if I have a reason to succeed." "And what reason is that?" I asked, though I suspected the answer. He pulled me down beside him on the bed, careful of his healing wound. "You, a life with you, waking up without checking for threats, taking you to dinner without bodyguards. Maybe," he paused, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. "Maybe even being someone you're proud of instead of someone you have to justify." "I'm already proud of you," I said softly. "You're trying to change something that's never been changed. That takes more courage than I have. You're hiding a wanted man in your apartment and lying to police. I think your courage is well established." We both laughed, and for a moment, it was easy to imagine this could work. That love and determination could overcome structural violence and generational obligation. That we could build something real from the ruins of his past. The illusion shattered with a phone call. Lorenzo's expression darkened as he listened, his body tensing despite the pain it caused. When he hung up, he looked at me with something like despair. "They've set fire to the mansion. My mansion, trying to draw me out." "Who?" "The same people who attacked you. They're escalating, trying to force me to respond, to prove I'm weak. If I don't..." He struggled to stand, and I pushed him back down. "You're not going anywhere. You can barely walk. If I don't go, they'll see it as surrender. Everything I've built will collapse. The families who've been negotiating with me will abandon the agreements. It'll be chaos, and that chaos will get people killed, including you." I stared at him, my mind racing. "Then we go together." "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous." "Lorenzo," I cut him off. "You said we're partners. That means I don't sit safely on the sidelines while you walk into a death trap. We go together, or you stay here and let the mansion burn." I grabbed my phone, texting Marcus. "If they want you to show up, you show up. But on our terms, with backup, with a plan. And I'm part of that plan." He looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. But I was done with half measures. Done with being the protected innocent while he fought battles alone. If this was our life, I needed to understand all of it. Even the darkest parts. Marcus arrived within minutes, bringing clothes, weapons, and a look of profound resignation. "This is a terrible idea," he said flatly. "Noted," Lorenzo replied, letting me help him dress. Every movement clearly hurt, but determination overrode pain. "But if we're doing this, we do it right. Marco, I need you to coordinate with the East Side crews. Make sure they're in position but not visible. And if anything goes wrong, I get her out first," Marcus finished. "Already understood." The drive to the mansion felt surreal. Dusk had fallen, painting the sky in shades of blood and ash. We could see the flames from a mile away, orange light pulsing against the darkness. Lorenzo's hand found mine, squeezing once. "Last chance to stay in the car?" he offered. Not happening. The mansion's grounds were chaos: firefighters battling the blaze, police establishing perimeters, and standing in the center of it all, watching the destruction with barely concealed satisfaction, was a man I'd never seen but instantly recognized. Older, expensive suit. Flanked by bodyguards, this was the rival boss, the one orchestrating everything. Lorenzo stepped out of the car, and the man's expression shifted from satisfaction to shock. "You're supposed to be dead," he said, his voice carrying over the roar of flames. "Disappointing, I know." Lorenzo moved forward, and I stayed close, my heart hammering. "But here I am. So let's discuss what happens next." "What happens next is I finish what I started. You're weak, DeLuca. Choosing reform over tradition, letting a woman make you soft. The families need real leadership. The families need to survive into the next decade," Lorenzo interrupted. "Your way is dying. The police are watching, the feds are investigating, and every violent incident accelerates our collective destruction. I'm offering evolution. You're clinging to extinction." The boss laughed, harsh and bitter. "And you think this teacher gives you moral authority? She's made you vulnerable. Proof that you can't lead." "She's made me remember what I'm fighting for," Lorenzo countered. "Something beyond power for its own sake. Legacy that doesn't require my children to live in fear." His voice strengthened despite his injury. "I'm done with the old ways. Done with alliances built on arranged marriages and territorial violence. You can join me in building something legitimate, or you can burn with the past. Your choice." The standoff stretched, tense and electric. I realized this was the point where Lorenzo's transformation would either be accepted or destroy him completely. And somehow, impossibly, I'd become part of that equation. Proof that he was serious about change, or evidence of weakness depending on perspective. Then I did something stupidly brave or bravely stupid. I stepped forward, directly between Lorenzo and the rival boss. "You think I make him weak?" I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I think I make him human. And humanity is the only thing that's going to save any of you from federal prison or early graves. Your children deserve better than this cycle. So do mine, the kids I teach, who watch their parents navigate your wars and learn that violence is the only language power speaks." The boss stared at me like I was an alien species. "You have no idea what you're talking about, girl." "Maybe not," I agreed. "But I know Lorenzo is trying to break a pattern that's broken everyone who's touched it. And if that's weakness, then weakness is the only strength that matters." Silence fell, broken only by the crack and hiss of burning timber. Then, incredibly, the boss laughed, real amusement mixing with something like respect. "You've got nerve, teacher. I'll give you that." He looked at Lorenzo. "You always did have better taste than your father. Fine, I'll hear your proposal. But if this reformation of yours fails, if you can't deliver what you promise, then you can say you told me so," Lorenzo finished. "But it won't fail. Not this time." The boss nodded once and turned away, his bodyguards following. The threat wasn't gone, but it had transformed into something manageable, a negotiation rather than a war. As the firefighters finally gained control of the blaze, Lorenzo pulled me against him, his face buried in my hair. "That was insane," he murmured. "You could have been killed." "So, could you? Apparently we're both committed to insanity." He laughed, the sound ragged with relief and exhaustion. "I love you. I should have said it before, but I'm saying it now. I love you, and I'm choosing you over everything else. The engagement, the expectations, all of it." My heart stuttered. "You're sure? Because that's not something you can take back. I've never been more sure of anything." His lips found mine, and the kiss tasted like smoke and promise. When we finally broke apart, the mansion still burning behind us, I realized we'd turned a corner. The danger wasn't over, but we'd proven we could face it together. The next months were a slow unwinding of Lorenzo's past. He formally dissolved the engagement with Gianna's family through a series of complicated negotiations that involved territory concessions and business partnerships. The police investigation concluded without charges, after witnesses suddenly became scarce, and evidence disappeared. Lorenzo transformed his operation with methodical precision, replacing illegal revenue streams with legitimate businesses, real estate development, import, export through legal channels, venture capital investments. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't clean. There were setbacks, threats, moments where everything nearly fell apart. But slowly, impossibly, he built something different, and I was there for all of it, learning the complexities of his world while maintaining my teaching job, living in both spheres simultaneously. We moved into a modest apartment together, nothing like the mansion, but it was ours. A space we'd chosen, decorated with books and plants and the kind of ordinary clutter that normal couples accumulated. Lorenzo bought a piano, smaller than the one that had burned, and started composing again. One evening, as I graded papers at the kitchen table, I heard a new melody drifting from the living room. "What's that one called?" I asked when he finished. He turned to look at me, his expression soft with contentment I'd never seen in those early days. "Teacher," he said simply. "It's called Teacher." Warmth flooded through me. "That's incredibly sappy." "I'm aware." He crossed to the kitchen, pulling me into his arms. "But you've earned sappiness. You stood between me and a rival boss in front of a burning building. You get to be immortalized in overly romantic piano compositions." I laughed, tipping my head back to kiss him. "I suppose I can live with that." The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. We exchanged a glance. We weren't expecting anyone, and unexpected visitors still triggered old instincts. Lorenzo checked the security camera on his phone, his expression tightening. "It's someone from the Moretti family," he said quietly. Fear spiked through me. Gianna's family? I thought that was settled. It should be. He opened the door cautiously, and I stayed close behind him. A man in an expensive suit stood in the hallway, his hands visible and empty. "Mr. DeLuca, Miss Reyes, apologies for the intrusion." He extended an envelope. "I've been sent to deliver this personally and to assure you it's not a threat. Merely an invitation." Lorenzo took the envelope, opening it carefully. Inside was a wedding invitation, Gianna's wedding to someone else, scheduled for next month. A note in elegant handwriting accompanied it. "You were right. Arranged marriages are relics. I found my own path too. No hard feelings." Gee. Relief and surprise washed over Lorenzo's face. "Tell her congratulations," he said to the messenger. "And thank you for the courtesy of informing us." The man nodded and left. I looked at the invitation in Lorenzo's hand, this final confirmation that his past was truly, completely closed. "So that's it?" I said. "We're really free?" "We're really free." He pulled me close, spinning me around the small living room. No obligations, no threats, no complications. Just us, building whatever life we want. It felt too good to be true. But looking at his face, younger somehow without the weight of expectation, I let myself believe it. We'd fought for this, earned it. Maybe that was enough. The weeks passed in a kind of domestic bliss I'd never imagined possible. Lorenzo continued his work transforming the family business, but the violence had drained away, replaced by conference calls and contract negotiations. I taught my students, and he sometimes came to school events, charming the parents and watching me work with a pride that made my heart ache. We talked about the future, careful conversations about what came next. Neither of us was ready to rush toward marriage or permanence, content for now to simply exist together. But the possibility hung in the air, unspoken but understood. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, as we shared coffee on our small balcony overlooking the ocean, the doorbell rang again. "Expecting someone?" I asked. Lorenzo shook his head, but he was already moving, that old caution resurfacing. He checked the camera and froze. "No," he said softly, and there was something in his voice. Fear, maybe, or resignation. "What is it?" Instead of answering, he opened the door. Two men stood there, FBI badges visible on their belts. "Lorenzo DeLuca?" the first one said. "We have questions regarding your family's past operations. We'd appreciate your cooperation." My blood ran cold. This was it, the other shoe finally dropping. All the transformation, all the legitimacy, but the past still had its teeth in him. Lorenzo's hand found mine, squeezing once. "I'll cooperate," he said calmly, "but I want my lawyer present." The agents nodded. "Understood. We can arrange that." They handed him a card. "Contact us within 48 hours to schedule the interview. And Mr. DeLuca, we know you've been working to change things. That'll be taken into account." After they left, Lorenzo sank onto the couch, his head in his hands. "I thought we were past this." "Maybe we are," I said, sitting beside him. "Maybe this is just them closing old cases, tying up loose ends. Or maybe it's the beginning of them unraveling everything I've built." "Then we deal with it," I said firmly. "The same way we've dealt with everything else, together. You're not alone in this, Lorenzo." He looked at me, and I saw the boy he must have been before his father's legacy crushed him, vulnerable, uncertain, desperate for someone to believe in him. "I don't deserve you." "Probably not," I agreed with a small smile. "But you're stuck with me anyway." The FBI investigation became a shadow over the next month. Lorenzo cooperated fully, bringing his lawyers, providing documentation of his legitimate operations, distancing himself from his family's past activities. I waited through each interview, my stomach in knots, wondering if this was how it would end with him in prison, our fragile life shattered. But slowly, impossibly, it became clear that the investigation wasn't targeting Lorenzo specifically. They were building cases against other families, other leaders who hadn't attempted reform. Lorenzo's cooperation, his documentation of his transformation, actually positioned him as a valuable witness rather than a primary target. They're offering immunity. his lawyer explained during a tense meeting. Full immunity from prosecution for past activities in exchange for testimony against the old guard. You'd be helping them dismantle the system your father helped build. Lorenzo looked at me, the question obvious in his eyes. This was betrayal of everything he'd been raised to believe, loyalty to the families above all else. But it was also freedom. Real, legal, permanent freedom. It's your choice, I said quietly. But I think you know what the right thing is. He took a breath, then nodded to his lawyer. I'll testify. Tell them I'll tell them everything. The decision changed everything. Lorenzo spent weeks in debriefings, providing to have intelliger information that helped the FBI build RICO cases against multiple families. It made him enemies, people who saw his cooperation as ultimate betrayal. We had to move again, accepting witness protection protocols, living under security arrangements that felt like our early days together. But it also freed him. When the trials concluded and the old guard was dismantled, Lorenzo emerged with a completely clean slate. The DeLuca name lost its power, its fear, its weight. He was just a man, a businessman with a complicated past, but a legitimate present. We returned to our coastal apartment, no longer under protection, no longer looking over our shoulders, and for the first time since I'd signed that lease so many months ago, I felt like we could breathe. What do you want to do? I asked him one evening as we watched the sunset. Now that you can do anything? He was quiet for a moment, his arm around my shoulders. I want to teach, he said finally. Music. I want to work with kids who come from backgrounds like mine and show them there's another way. I want to be proud of what I do, instead of just relieved I'm not hurting people. Tears stung my eyes. This man who'd been raised to control an empire wanted to teach children piano. I think that's perfect, I whispered. And I want to marry you, he added, turning to face me. Not because of any arrangement or alliance, just because I can't imagine my life without you. You saw the worst of me and chose to stay. You stood beside me through everything. I want to spend the rest of my life earning that loyalty. He didn't have a ring, didn't drop to one knee. It was just the two of us on a balcony watching the sun sink into the ocean, two people who'd survived impossible odds. Yes, I said, laughing through tears. Obviously, yes. The wedding was small, just Marcus, Mrs. Chen, a few colleagues and friends. No families, no obligations, just the people who genuinely supported us. Lorenzo played piano as I walked, down the makeshift aisle in our apartment, the melody achingly beautiful. When we exchanged vows, I thought about that first day I'd signed the lease, how terrified and desperate I'd been, how I'd had no idea what I was walking into. I'd found danger, yes, but I'd also found love in its purest form, the kind that demanded bravery and honesty and transformation, the kind that didn't come easy but lasted precisely because it was hard-won. Our life settled into a new rhythm. I taught at the academy, watching my students grow and learn. Lorenzo started a music program at an after-school center in the neighborhood where he'd grown up, teaching kids who needed beauty in their lives as much as they needed hope. We had dinner together every night, sharing stories about difficult students and small victories. We traveled when we could, making up for all the years he'd been trapped by obligation. It was ordinary and extraordinary all at once, the kind of life I'd dreamed about before I ever met him, but richer for everything we'd survived to achieve it. On our first anniversary, I came home to find Lorenzo at the piano, playing something new. The melody was different from anything he'd composed before, not dark or brooding, but genuinely joyful. When he finished, he turned to me with a smile that still made my heart skip. New composition? I asked. New beginning, he corrected. He handed me a piece of paper, official documents showing that the DeLuca family holdings had been completely dissolved, assets distributed to legitimate charities and businesses. It's done. All of it. My father's empire doesn't exist anymore except in history books. I looked at the papers, then at him. How do you feel? Light, he said simply. For the first time in my life, I feel light. I set the papers aside and moved into his arms. I'm proud of you. Unbelievably proud. I couldn't have done it without you. You know that, right? You were the reason I wanted to change. The proof that a different life was possible. We saved each other, I said. That's how this works. He kissed me, soft and sweet, and I thought about that terrified teacher signing a suspicious lease. If I could go back and warn her about everything that was coming, the danger, the heartbreak, the impossible choices, would I? Would I tell her to run? No. I'd tell her to be brave, to trust her instincts, to hold on tight when things got scary, because the reward on the other side of fear was worth every moment of terror. The doorbell rang, interrupting our kiss. We both stiffened, old habits dying hard, but Lorenzo checked his phone and relaxed. "It's just a delivery," he said. But when he opened the door, there was no delivery man. Instead, a figure in a dark suit stood in the hallway, face obscured by shadows. My heart stopped. Lorenzo pushed me behind him instinctively, his body tense. "Can I help you?" The figure stepped forward into the light, and I recognized him, one of the men from the FBI investigation, an agent who'd worked closely with Lorenzo during the trials. He held up his hands, showing he was unarmed. "Apologies for the dramatics," he said, "but there's been a development you need to know about." Fear spiked through me. "What kind of development?" The agent glanced at me, then back to Lorenzo. "One of the families you testified against, the Cordano family, their youngest son was just released on a technicality, and he's made threats, specifically about settling old scores." He handed Lorenzo a folder. "These are the details. Protective custody is available if you want it, but I wanted to give you the courtesy of a heads up first." Lorenzo took the folder, his expression unreadable. After everything, after all the transformation and redemption, the past still reached for us. "Thank you for the warning," he said quietly. "We'll review it and let you know." After the agent left, we sat in silence, the folder unopened between us. Finally, Lorenzo took my hand. "I won't let this touch us," he said. "I've built something legitimate, testified in court. I have the law on my side now. Whatever this is, we'll handle it. Together," I added. "Always together." We opened the folder and read through the threat assessment. It was serious but manageable: extra security, vigilance, the usual precautions. Not enough to destroy the life we'd built, but enough to remind us that some doors, once opened, never fully closed. That night, lying in bed with Lorenzo's arm around me, I thought about the question I'd asked him months ago. What did he want to do with his freedom? He'd answered, and he was living that answer, teaching music, building legitimate success, loving me without reservation. But I'd never answered it for myself. What did I want? I already had my career, my students, the sense of purpose that came from teaching. But there was something else growing inside me, a desire for more, for family maybe, for the kind of permanence that wasn't just about surviving threats but actually thriving beyond them. "Lorenzo?" I said into the darkness. "I want kids someday. Our kids. Is that something you've thought about?" He was quiet for a moment, his hand stilling on my shoulder. Then he pulled me closer, his voice rough with emotion. "Every day. I think about it every day. Children who grow up knowing they're loved, not groomed for succession. Who learn piano because it's beautiful, not because it's expected. Who have you as a mother and never doubt they're safe. Even with the threats? Even with your past? Especially because of them. Because I know exactly what kind of world I don't want them to inherit, and I'm doing everything in my power to change it." He kissed the top of my head. "Whenever you're ready, I'm ready." We fell asleep wrapped around each other, dreaming of futures that felt possible. And when morning came, we faced it the same way we'd faced, everything together, determined, unbreakable in the ways that mattered. The threat from the Cordano family never materialized into action. Whether our security deterred them or the FBI's continued surveillance convinced them to back off, we never knew. But gradually, the fear faded into background noise, just another thing we were aware of but didn't let control us. Life continued. Lorenzo's music program expanded, serving more kids every semester. I was promoted to department chair at the academy, giving me more influence over curriculum and student support. We bought a small house with a garden, nothing like the mansion but perfect for us. Lorenzo planted vegetables with the same careful attention he'd once applied to controlling an empire. On a Sunday afternoon, 2 years after we'd married, I found him in the garden, dirt on his hands, completely absorbed in tying up tomato plants. I watched him for a moment, this man who'd been born into violence and chosen gentleness. "Lorenzo," I called, and he looked up with a smile that still made my knees weak. "Come help me," he said. "These plants are stubborn." I joined him, kneeling in the dirt, our hands working together to support the sprawling vines. It was mundane and beautiful, the kind of moment I'd never imagined possible in those early days of fear and uncertainty. Do you ever miss it? I asked. The power? The control? He considered the question seriously. Sometimes I miss the certainty. Knowing exactly what was expected, how to solve problems with force and money. But then I look at what I have now, you, this house, students who light up when they finally master a difficult piece, and I realize I never had anything worth missing. He squeezed my hand, leaving dirt smudges on my fingers. This is power. Building something that can't be taken by violence. That's the only victory that matters. We finished with the garden as the sun began its descent, painting the sky in watercolors. Inside, Lorenzo washed vegetables while I prepared dinner, and we talked about nothing important weekend plans. A funny thing a student had said, whether we should repaint the living room. Ordinary conversation between ordinary people, which was the most extraordinary thing we'd ever achieved. The doorbell rang just as we were sitting down to eat. We both froze, that old instinct flaring despite years of peace. Lorenzo checked his phone, frowning, not showing anyone on the camera. My heart raced as he moved toward the door, and I followed, unable to help myself. When he opened it, an envelope lay on the doormat, nothing else. No messenger, no figure in the shadows, just a cream-colored envelope with our names written in elegant script. Lorenzo picked it up carefully, opening it while I peered over his shoulder. Inside was an invitation, but not the threatening kind we'd feared. It was from Mrs. Chen, inviting us to her nephew Jamie's high school graduation. A note in her handwriting accompanied it. He's applying to music schools thanks to someone's influence. Thought you'd want to celebrate the boy you saved in more ways than one. Relief flooded through me so intensely I nearly laughed. Not a threat, just a reminder that the good we'd done rippled outward in ways we couldn't always see. Lorenzo's expression softened, something like wonder crossing his face. I'd forgotten, he admitted quietly. That whole incident, I was so focused on protecting you, I didn't think about what happened to the kid after. You saved him, I said. And now he's graduating, pursuing music because of your program. That's your legacy now, not your father's empire. These kids. He pulled me close, and I felt the tension drain from his body. We stood there in the doorway as evening settled around us, holding each other like we had so many times before, after danger, after revelation, after choosing each other again and again. We should go, he said eventually. To the graduation. Definitely. I kissed him softly. But right now, dinner's getting cold. We returned to our table, to the meal we'd prepared together, to the ordinary magic of a life we'd fought for and won. And as we ate and laughed and planned for Jamie's graduation, I realized this was what happiness looked like. Not the absence of danger or struggle, but the presence of love strong enough to survive both. The past would always be there, a shadow we couldn't completely erase. But we'd learn to live in the light anyway, building moments of peace and joy that accumulated into a life. A real life, messy and complicated and beautiful. And in the end, that simple teacher who'd signed a lease she didn't understand had found exactly what she needed. Not the fresh start she'd imagined, but something better. A love that demanded courage. A partner who chose growth over comfort. And the knowledge that ordinary and dangerous could coexist, transformed by the alchemy of two people refusing to let fear define their story. We'd survived the fire. Now we were learning to thrive in what grew from the ashes. And that, I thought as Lorenzo reached across the table to take my hand, was the greatest victory of all.